Simon, a very good afternoon. Always good to see you. So the outrage on the streets of the United States overnight has to do with the fact that we've had a settlement from the government with Breonna Taylor's family, I think to the tune of $12 million, yet none of the police officers who were in the raid that resulted in her shooting and her death are actually going to face murder charges.
Yes, and the extraordinary development over the last 24 hours is that the only police officer facing any kind of criminal charges was not even in Breonna Taylor's flat when the fatal shot was fired. In fact, the police officer who fired the fatal shot is not facing any criminal charges relating to her killing, nor is the other police officer who was present in that flat at the time. This third officer who's been charged with wanton endangerment is essentially accused of firing indiscriminately from a next-door flat when he heard the exchange of gunfire taking place in Breonna Taylor's flat that led to her being killed by police. So even as this announcement was being made yesterday by the Attorney General of Kentucky, Daniel Cameron, people on the streets of Louisville in Kentucky were sobbing. There was absolute disbelief that the officer who shot the fatal round that killed Breonna Taylor, we now know that she died less than 2 minutes after she was struck by gunfire, is to face absolutely no criminal prosecution whatsoever, not even a low-level felony, nothing, no kind of legal action being taken against him, and that's why there were protests and unrests on the streets of Louisville last night. 2 police officers wounded in a shooting. A 26-year-old man who was participating in those protests has just been arrested and is going to be charged himself with wanton endangerment in relation to those shootings overnight in Louisville. The community there simply stunned by this decision by prosecutors and the grand jury.
There is now a situation where a curfew will be in place to try and quell these demonstrations, but will it succeed given that we've seen months of similar demonstrations because of the killing of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, killed in May also by US police?
Yeah, well, it didn't succeed last night. They had a 9 p.m. curfew in place in Louisville last night, and clearly that was not observed by many people on the streets. There is such an intensity of anger, Tembakile, there and in other cities across the country. Protests last night in New York and in other locations. And it is because, as Benjamin Crump, the attorney for Breonna Taylor's family, observed yesterday, this would be one thing if it was happening in a vacuum, if you could point to all sorts of other cases where police have been successfully prosecuted for the kind of treatment that was meted out, in this case to Breonna Taylor, in an entirely botched drugs raid. There should never have been any kind of raid on her flat in Louisville in the first place. But you can't point to that. What you see is this happening again and again and again in jurisdiction after jurisdiction here in the United States, and it builds to this feeling that Black Lives Matter supporters and protesters have, that there is a total lack of accountability for police officers. In this case, the Attorney General in Kentucky saying that they were justified in using force because Breonna Taylor's boyfriend fired the first shot. Well, he's testified that he fired the first shot because he thought they were armed intruders breaking into the house in the middle of the night. He had no idea that this was a police search warrant that was being executed. So real fury, I think, that could build on the streets of Louisville in the coming days.
And it's one of 2 big stories in the United States over the past 24 hours. The other has to do, of course, with the President Donald Trump, who, speaking last night, would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power, if you will, should he lose the election in November. Why is that?
Yeah, look, an absolutely jaw-dropping moment. I mean, the hallmark of American democracy is the US Constitution. It is the fact that every time there's a change in administrations here, it occurs peacefully, and it has done since the founding of the American Republic. President Trump asked a simple yes or no question at the White House last night. Will you adhere to a peaceful transfer of power if you lose this election? And his answer to that question was, Well, we'll have to see what happens. And he again talked about his unsubstantiated claim that millions of fraudulent ballots are cast in American presidential elections. This was an extraordinary moment historically for the United States, with a president of the United States not only saying that he won't commit to a peaceful transfer of power, but leaving all of his colleagues, Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, leading Republican senators up on Capitol Hill, now being asked by reporters if they believe that the president ought to be committing to a peaceful transfer of power. And there's an irony in all of this, Tembekeely. The president went on Twitter last night as the unrest was playing out in Louisville and tweeted a 3-word message in all capital letters: law and order. He wants to see law and order on the streets of Louisville, but he won't commit to the law and order of the United States democratically, which is the peaceful transfer of power. That's an astonishing moment in the United States.
ENCA correspondent in the United States, Simon Marks, always good to speak to you. Thank you.